Hi, it's Robert Mendelson, Fractional CMO here in beautiful Montreal, welcoming you to another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada Podcast. We're part of Fractional Pros Canada, the home for Canada's fractional community, and you can find us on Facebook. We bring you conversations about everything fractional that matters, for fractional executives and businesses from coast to coast. Think of this as your go-to spot for real talk, practical wisdom, and strategies you can actually use, all without the corporate fluff and with plenty of Canadian content. Whether you're a fractional pro or a business in our great country of Canada and beyond, this conversation is for you. Grab your espresso and let's dive in. Welcome to the Fractional Pros Canada Podcast. I'm your host and fractional CMO, Robert Mendelson, here in beautiful Montreal. Today we're tackling a topic that hits the bottom line and the front lines of many Canadian businesses, and not just Canadian businesses. Of course, the topic is tariffs. And to break it down, I'm joined today by two great fractional leaders who have both guided clients through these exact challenges. And they are both members of our Fractional Pros Canada community. So if you have not joined us and you're a fractional pro in Canada, check us out in Facebook. Just look for the group Fractional Pros Canada. We have today from Mississauga, just down the road from here, Chuoru, a fractional CFO, founder of Elevate Virtual CFO. She specializes in helping 7 to 8 figure family-owned manufacturers get out of a cash flow crunch and scale with confidence. And then further down the road from Vancouver, we have Jason So. Jason is a fractional CMO, founder of Strand Consulting. He has over 2 decades of experience with global brands like Hootsuite and Porsche, and is also a certified advisor for the Canadian Digital Adoption Program, otherwise affectionately known here as CDAP. Today's Fractional Pros Canada podcast is powered by Your CMO, the proven framework for fractional CMOs. Learn more at yourcmo.com. That's YORCMO.com. Chuoru and Jason, welcome to the pod.
Hi, Robert. Happy to be here.
Thanks for having us, Robert.
All right, so let's kick things off. I know both of you have had direct experience guiding clients through the complexities of tariffs. So let's learn a little bit more about the different client situations that you've encountered regarding tariffs. So maybe Jason, you could start off. What kind of clients have you had? What kind of issues have you tackled? I guess since you're CMO, probably more marketing, growth challenges that clients have in the face of tariffs. So tell us a little bit about what's going on there.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Rob. I would say in terms of the type of clients we typically work with, the primary profile tends to be mid-sized companies, a lot of them in traditional, especially with the CDAP program in the last couple of years. We saw a major influx of more traditional type of companies. Primarily, if I have to think about from a revenue range, anywhere between 5 million to 100 million. 5 million really is the floor, and it really depends on the type of industry, whether that would work with our type of practice. To answer your question in terms of what we've been seeing with the tariff, when the discussions hit in January, February, definitely like everyone, and still now, everyone got cold feet. So any big moves, any major initiatives were basically put on hold immediately, and a lot of people had trepidation. And what it really brought me back to was basically the last, if you want to call it, 2.5 recessions that I've worked through. So first was the dot-com crash. Next was the '08 financial crisis. And then you could also argue the COVID as well. Even though it wasn't specifically a recession, the mentality of a lot of industries and businesses were the same.
So that counts as a half recession, the COVID recession in your books. That was a half recession.
It depends on the industry you're in, I'd say. You know, for some people, it's a full recession. Absolutely. For others, it was boom times, and then some. So it really depends on your perspective and the type of company you're working with. Nonetheless, though, I would say, if we're going to talk about COVID times and whatnot, the approach is what we found is very similar in terms of ensuring that you've got your fundamentals down. And so that's in terms of our practice, it's always going in and, okay, let's first do a diagnosis, understand whether you got all the basics done before you start adding all the extra stuff. And if you're starting to look at like any kind of, I call it wartime situation, you're looking really hard at every single dollar spent. It sounds basic, but you want to make sure you're throwing good money at good traffic. And just like to quote another famous Canadian businessman, Jim Pattison, every business can afford to trim 15% in something. whether that's people, whether it's processes, whether it's place in terms of from a marketing spend in terms of media. And one of my core philosophies is it's not necessarily about whether it's good times or bad times. It's not either just slashing away what you have right away, or whether it's adding tons of, like additional budget unnecessarily. Let's look at what you're working with first. Because I always believe before you either increase or decrease your overall budget, marketing budget, which impacts your overall OPEX as a business, what can you do within there to optimize that? So looking at, and during these times, what I've seen in the past is the first thing we go from a marketing mix standpoint. Unfortunately, it's a lot of the traditional media, which a lot of it is top of funnel, out of funnel, CEOs that we work with, boards that we work with. They really want to see how's it impacting the bottom line and right away. And they're really starting to hone in and things that they used to not question and where, we call them vanity metrics. They're suddenly saying, no, we don't care about those vanity metrics. Let's look at, what's it doing for the bottom line in terms of closed ones or real leads or actual value of opportunities. Let's cut away all that fluff. So in terms of how we approached it, we really, I wouldn't say it's that dissimilar to our approach in general, because our philosophy is always forget about the vanity metric. Like there's so many distractions especially in the marketing industry. I joke that every week there's something new, but what's going to really help move your revenue needle? So that's generally speaking the approach we've been taking.
So trimming the fat, trimming the 15%, which is always a good idea. And then you're seeing companies who are like, all right, let's kill the top of funnel efforts, the vanity stuff, which of course is always a good idea until somewhere down the road, all of a sudden the pipeline is empty, the sales pipeline is empty. You're like, hey, how did that happen? It's like, well, we scaled back on the top of funnel efforts, and here we are. So
yeah, absolutely. It goes in cycles always. And believe me, I come from a brand marketing background actually in the earlier days, so I get it. But in situations like this, you got to adapt to the business climate. And then when things pick up again, there's nothing to say you can't reinvest back into that. It's just that for now, at least for the next 2 quarters, from what we've seen and the discussions we're having with CEOs and boards, there is really one focus, and it's revenue.
So Chuoru, you're a CFO, a fractional CFO, so you look at it through a different lens. Does it make more sense to you to start cutting the expenses that are not driving direct, tangible, measurable business? And what do you advise your clients in that respect during tariff times?
Yeah, so we mostly focus on working with manufacturing clients, which is direct impact from this tariff roller coaster, as I call it, since the beginning of the year. Not only in cost of goods sold, your material price, but also directly impact how your customer experience and how your customer relationships. So as a fractional CFO, there's a lot of different pieces that we look at, not just from the top line. Obviously, we want to maintain the top line, but at the same time, we always look at how the tariff impact our margins on specific products. What kind of materials were impacted because of these tariff impact, your shipping, your logistic cost. At the same time, how do we sustain that margin by adjusting our cost, adjusting our pricing strategies, but at the same time, not creating too big of a negative customer experience for the customers? Because at the end of the day, we can easily say we want to cut down our expenses, we want to increase our prices, but at the end of the day, the customer experience is what brings in all the businesses and maintain that revenue for the business. So there's a lot of different pieces that we look at, not just on it's not a simple math, I would say.
Yeah, customer, at the end of the day, the customer is number one, and got to maintain that, protect that relationship and that good customer experience. That's good advice. Chuoru, building on that, in situations you faced, what would you say is the biggest unexpected financial leak or cash flow problem that tariffs create for your customers, for your clients?
Right. So the first thing we want to look at is if there's any specific materials in manufacturing business specifically, if there's any materials that is causing an increase and decrease of margins. So this is where we start to look at specific suppliers. Say, for example, one of my clients, they purchase material from the US. But at the same time, when they bring the material from the US to Canada for manufacturing, and then they sell it back to US customers. So this is almost a double impact because
Double whammy.
Canada. Yeah, yes. So this is when we look at, okay, if there's any way we can make this process more efficient, if there's any, in terms of talking about leaks, if this is one of the leaks that we see, because if you are bringing materials from the US, manufacturing it here, and then you sell it back, your basic tax, your tariffs twice. So this is where we started to look at the solutions to kind of mitigate that. For example, I would advise the clients to start diversifying suppliers, starting to look for suppliers maybe within Canada that can provide similar material or identical material, but at a different, cost structure that we can avoid tariff. So that is one of the things that we will look at. Another thing is even we're starting to look at if there's any opportunities to maybe assemble the products within the US or within Canada, or start to diversify customers instead of besides the customers in the US, how do we find customers in Canada as well to kind of mitigate that impact?
So it's really the bad news, the good news, the bad news, tariffs. The good news is starting to force companies to think a little bit out of the box and get a little bit more creative, which is never a bad thing. Jason,
Exactly.
once a company is faced with all these new costs that they have no control over or little control over, and they try to figure out creative solutions, ultimately at some point, the marketing department, the CMO is going to come under the lens like, hey, we're spending too much money here. Can you walk us through an example of how you've helped a client navigate that, and what kind of specific messaging or positioning strategies you might use or recommend a client use to handle tariff-related price changes while still maintaining the customer loyalty and the customer happiness?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Rob. For us, it starts early on in the diagnosis process as well. One of the key metrics that we look for is customer LTV, customer lifetime value. And I literally talked to a SLT just last week about this in terms of what's the value of not just a single transaction, but over a specific time frame. Let's just use hypothetically 5 years, because a lot of times businesses will look at, okay, what's my customer acquisition cost? And they'll just look at it versus the first transaction. The example I always use, and don't get me wrong, it's unique. It is Apple, but it's a great example. People understand it. Average price of this phone is maybe, I don't know, between $600 to $1,000. But Apple doesn't base their CAC, the customer acquisition cost, on $1,000 in terms of how much to portion towards it. They know their average customer lifetime value is anywhere between $5,000 to maybe $7,000 to $8,000, because once you get on the Apple ecosystem, you're going to get iCloud, you're going to get an Apple Watch, you're going to get an iPad for your family, maybe you're going to get the pen as well, and so on and so forth, and that recurring revenue model. So for me, it always starts with that discussion. Anchor it to the LTV and making sure that whatever your CAC is, your customer acquisition cost, is within the prescribed ratio. So that's the key there. And then from there as well, we're looking at cost per lead and whatnot. So yes, I'm a marketer, but you could argue I'm a bit of a spreadsheet marketer. I believe that data helps inform and gives you some guardrails as a business in terms of how much to spend, in terms of the type of creative you're going to do. If you have that framework set up, it makes it a lot easier. It's when you don't, and you're literally the business and everyone's finger in the air. Oh yeah, I think we should do this just because of gut feel, because of historic historical traditions in the business, random anecdotes from one or two different people in the business. I want to make sure that I always have a solid foundation of data from a variety of different viewpoints to validate any insights. So, formed intuition effectively, especially in a lot of these traditional businesses we work with. There's a lot of intuition. They've been in business, some of them 40, 50 years. They may have been started by the grandparents, handed down to maybe the second, third generation now. They're at the point where they're like, hey, you know what, we want to take this to the next level. But, they understand that they're missing that data layer. So that's one of the key things that we bring to help navigate those types of discussions and keeping costs down. And so with that, we've got a full picture in terms of, okay, what did they spend before? What are they spending now? What should we adjust? How does that fit in with their overall customer lifetime value? Because if you don't understand that LTV number, I firmly believe you can either underspend or you can overspend. And again, it's not a hard and fast rule. It's not an absolute percent, but at least it'll give you a guideline and you'll know your benchmark.
Chuoru, you must love speaking to a fractional CMO who describes himself as a spreadsheet marketer. That must be music to your ears. Whenever you hear the word spreadsheet, do you get very excited?
Well, depends on how big that spreadsheet is.
Depends on the numbers on the spreadsheet too, right?
Depends on the numbers of the spreadsheet and the color coding.
The CFO,
yeah,
so.
Yeah, and the color coding.
Red means good, right? If it's traffic light.
Jason, have you seen a Canadian client successfully use tariffs to their advantage? Was there something, that maybe they decided, let's go made in Canada, that they've never really pushed before, or some other kind of messaging that they actually figured out a way to leverage the tariff impact to their advantage?
I would say there hasn't been a silver bullet that I've seen. The ones who are wholly owned and run in Canada, but like a lot of people, they're promoting the fact that they're Canadian owned and operated. However, though, I like anything, there's, like I said before, there's no silver bullet for this particular business. They're in healthcare. They've got 40 different locations all across Western Canada. Yes, they're putting that message on, and they've come to us recently saying, hey, we've noticed a major kind of decrease in terms of lead flow, and their pipeline has gone really quiet. I'm looking at their occupancy rates, way below what we had targeted for the year. Related, we're kind of advising on a specific portion, so we're not looking after everything. We're looking at primarily the performance marketing, but nonetheless, though, we're looking at beyond just the numbers in front of us, because their business is so tied to macroeconomic factors, i.e. the housing market. So this particular business, they're a bit of on a hyper growth track. When I started with them about 2.5, 3 years ago, that 18 locations, they're primarily in independent living senior care. And so within about 1.5 years, 2 years, they doubled to 40 locations. So they're well-funded, a very successful business. However, though, when we started digging beneath the surface and I started thinking, and is again, going back to the data that we had acquired in the diagnosis phase in our customer interviews, where they said to us, well, I need to, and the key insight that we were able to glean at that time was that they need to sell the prime principal residence in order to fund this, because independent living is different from subsidized retirement homes where you go in, you pay nothing or the government pays for it. Some people are paying up to almost 10,000 plus, and there's some communities that people are paying $20,000 a month to be in these places. So the majority of people who are going to be going in these places, they need to sell their principal residence. The housing market, as we know, is ground to a halt across the country. So everything from whether it's, and I know, right next door, my neighbor has had her place listed since Christmas, and they keep doing price drops. They were asking a bit much initially. So, they missed the boat, I think. So they're kind of chasing it down a little bit now. Nonetheless, though, and we looked in their specific area where that location was having challenges around the Alberta area. And so they gave us some anecdotal evidence. We dove into it a bit more and we said, well, actually, no. Yes, it's a balanced market, but if you look year over year, there's this, I can't know what the exact percentage was, but in terms of sales volume, it was down. Right? Forget about the price, but just down. So that means people aren't selling, people aren't transacting. A lot of these people, and again, understanding their demographic, they are if they're anything like my neighbor, they would have bought 30 years ago. They literally have no reason to sell. that they know that it's going to pick back up. Probably we believe and everyone believes it's going to pick back up, or at least moderate once these tariff things get settled. So that's kind of the general approach that we'll use for this type of situation. We have another client in the private equity space. One of their portfolios I work very closely with. Same story how 90% and they're in the industry about defense and public safety. 89% of the revenue is from a single manufacturer supplied to all the police forces, military, sheriffs, etc. across Canada. So kind of similar to your story as well, for in terms of being almost like double taxed, because effectively the products are coming in from the States, they're being a tariff, but they're selling it back to the government, effectively like military armed forces or police forces. So what they did in that scenario, and I can't claim responsibility for this, but what they did was, and this might be a helpful tip for some of your listeners, they talked to a trade lawyer. And so the trade lawyer went back with them, and they're able to get almost like a reprieve or a pause until I believe it's somewhere towards the end of the year, to Q4. So there is no tariff because they need to figure out if it makes sense. In addition, they also have some of their people who are very experienced in Ottawa trying to lobby some of the government as well. Because yes, they can switch suppliers, and I have had discussions with them. It has fast-tracked some of those discussions, but also from a pure product standpoint, when it comes to defense and public safety, it is pretty hard to beat what the U.S. produces in terms of quality of materials. They're just way ahead of everybody. So for that reason, they haven't switched completely, but like a lot of businesses, they are looking at diversifying and looking at other options and promoting and importing and bringing products in from Europe, for example.
Chuoru, I'm sure you've already talked about what companies need to do from a financial perspective to try to mitigate the effects of tariffs. What about companies who are reticent to be open to changing what they've done for so many years, maybe so many decades? It's just been working, and now all of a sudden, tariffs, and they need to do things they've never done before, which is risky, right? Maybe it's trying to find new suppliers, or making some real major changes to the spreadsheet, to the balance sheet that they've never had to do before. How would you help a company who's struggling with that? Kind of like, how would you nudge them towards going for it and taking those risks?
Right. So typically for a company, if they are looking to make drastic change, we would actually sit down and discuss with them what they're looking to do. So we always set medium and long-term goals with our clients. So for example, if there's a company who wants to, say, for example, completely change their product line or completely change their product component to be something else, we will sit down with them and see what the realistic and practical timeline to do that. And then we kind of reverse engineer into some actionable steps, achievable, realistic action steps. Business owners probably can understand sometimes when you set ambitious goals, they get overwhelmed on the things that they want to achieve. Sometimes they're trying to achieve many things at the same time, and it not only overwhelmed at their stress level financially, but also in the organizational level. So we always advise clients to maintain focus on what's driving the revenue. So if you have 10 products and we're trying to develop 2 products that are only rely on Canadian suppliers or Canadian manufacturer, and you don't want to rely on suppliers from the US, continue to focus maintaining the revenue for the products that are generating the biggest revenue, because you don't want to lose focus and chase the shiny object. Continue to maintain the main product, but at the same time, develop goals and objectives for the new product and kind of set stages of achievements for it. And we keep tab of the goals, set up specific KPIs for these objectives, and we revisit them every month or every quarter and see where the progress is. We also continue to maintain the customer relationship and the supplier relationship. You don't want to cut out a specific supplier just because you're charging tariff on it. But at the same time, start looking for new suppliers that may be able to, as a backup, to work as a backup or as a supplemental supplier in case something happened in this main supplier. Regularly negotiate supplier terms, negotiate terms and credit limits with your suppliers. If a lot of times the clients that I work with, they already have long-term relationship with specific suppliers. And just sit down with them very honestly and talk about the situation as a business partner. We all understand this tariff impact not only is for the business itself, but also for the supplier as well. So always sit down and have that honest discussion with them and just talk about us like we support each other. We are both impacted by the tariff. How can we get to a solution where it's benefit for both ends? So always be honest and open, have this discussion with this long-term supplier and customers as partners. And I believe if businesses all support each other, they will always find a solution to meet each other to get to a win-win situation.
Yeah, those are great tips. And I think that highlights again the value of having a fractional CFO, because it's easier for somebody who's not, in the company 24/7 to kind of keep the company on track with the back to basics. Takes a lot of the emotion out of the decisions. In many cases you have a company who's being run by the founder, who's the CEO, who's been managing the financial responsibilities for years and years, and it's tough to make those kinds of decisions. And in some cases, there's pride issues too, right? Especially in the cases where you're talking about a company who's had long relationships with suppliers for tens of years, like decades, now has to go and I can see in some founders' minds, some CEOs' minds, I feel like I'm groveling, I'm showing weakness if I have to go to them and say, hey, I need your help. We need to do something like that. That could be a very vulnerable position. So I think it's really helpful to have a frackie that's bad. I mean, in previous businesses that I've had myself, I've had to do that when times were bad. And I was always surprised how open vendors and suppliers were to working with us and saying, okay, I'll give you an extra 5% off for the next 3 months. I understand. It's incredible. At the end of the day, people like helping people, and also the vendors realize they want to preserve this relationship because, they have a good customer. So there's skin in the game for them to help as well. Jason, CDAP, Canadian Digital Adoption Program, has that had a sharp increase in popularity? You're getting, is the phone proverbially ringing off the hook since the tariffs came on the scene? What's happening to that department?
So with the CDAP program, that actually ended, and I need to update my LinkedIn profile on that. That did end that program, I believe, earlier this year, around February time.
Thank you, because I in my head, I'm like, I thought that ended. So thank you for correcting that. Okay.
Yeah. But I can speak in terms of, I guess, pre-tariff, there was, and the type of companies that were coming in, it was one of those things, in terms of the process of applying as an organization. We actually had to go through a very thorough screening process. And it was something in terms of the approach, running a diagnosis for these businesses. That was something we were already doing. I would say where our approach was a little bit different compared to other companies. And again, just like people, we're not the right fit for every business, right? In terms of scale, in terms of approach, in terms of digital maturity, and business maturity as well. There's usually a certain pain point that we're looking for, and they're looking to help get solved for us to be the right fit. And so we had to go through a very thorough screening process and effectively do, show them in terms of our diagnosis process. And then from that, we got approved. And then the government was sending us a variety of leads in terms of different organizations. We were also referred by other agencies as well, where potentially their approach, primarily, I would say they may focus a little bit more on the creative side or more social side, as opposed to, our approach is, again, spreadsheet marketers. understanding funnels, helping to define them, understand how to improve them. I consider us more of a management consulting approach as opposed to a pure marketer. Yes, myself and my team start off as marketers, and we do have marketers, but I very much consider us more management consultants in terms of our approach, because we're going beyond just creative and messaging and storytelling. Yes, that's important, very important, but we're adding a different layer to it in addition to that.
And has Mr. Carney and his government given any signals that there's going to be a new program coming to replace or kind of be kind of like what CDAP was?
We're watching that space very closely, as you can imagine. We've been reaching out to the feds to find out if there's any hint of that. If I had to guess, though, my guess is it would be probably targeted for certain sectors, as opposed to that was a little bit different. That was during, I believe, 2020. Near a peak pandemic. It was very much a blanket. Okay, let's help all SMBs in general. There were certain industries that were excluded, but there weren't that many. It was more like a general minimum floor in terms of revenue range and up to a ceiling in terms of small and mid-sized businesses, and that range was very big. And we realized going through that process and that's where we refined our approach in terms of our focus, in terms of our targeted audience and our own company's ICP with more mid-size. Or mature small is the least, and you got to have more of a recurring revenue model for us to really our type of approach to work, and for us to both make business sense. But yeah, we're watching very closely to see if Mr. Carney is going to be bringing out a similar program, and we'll be in line at the front of the line, as you can imagine, because it was a fantastic program. I think it benefited everybody, both from the client company side in terms of all these small mid-sized businesses who, they're great at what they do. They've been in business for a long time, many of them. Some of them may be first-time founders or first-time CEOs, et cetera, et cetera. And it was a great learning for them to have someone come in and do a very thorough deep dive into their business. And then especially with the larger ones, and our approach tends to be, we want to work with organizations that want to continue on, not just like a one diagnosis audit and that's it. Good luck on your own. That's where usually the more mid-sized businesses are a better fit for us, because they're also, after the audit is done, they're like, okay, how do we get this implemented? And how do we make sure it's implemented in the right way?
All right, so Mr. Prime Minister, if you're listening in, this would be a great venue for you to announce the new program. We're happy to have you on as a guest. Have your people call my people. All right, let's deliver some actionable takeaways for our audience of fractional leaders who are listening in today. So based on client situations that you've guided, what would you say is the single most important piece of proactive advice that you would give another fractional CFO or CMO on how to prepare their clients for the uncertainty of tariffs and general crazy global trade policies that we're seeing?
I think the number one thing is to show clarity to the clients, no matter what fractional fields you're in. I feel like a lot of times client is very in the business on the daily, and sometimes they don't see the big picture. So I always feel like the business owners and the CEOs, they are good at making decisions, but sometimes they just don't see the good picture to make the sound decisions. So bringing that clarity, either on a number side, on a spreadsheet, or on a chart, or whatever that is, bringing that clarity to the owner, to the business owner, to the CEO is the first step to really get them to make informed decisions.
Jason,
I see you're nodding in agreement.
Yeah. Yeah, you probably guess where I'm going with this based on what I've said already. Very similar in terms of that transparency. If you don't have the data and you're not measuring everything, and I don't mean, yes, you need to measure everything, but measure what matters, you can't really make informed decisions. Again, you're shooting from the gut. You're making decisions based on emotion. You're making decisions based on past decisions, which may or may not have yielded the results you actually wanted, because unfortunately, perception isn't always reality. So making sure they have that clarity, as Chuoru mentioned, and that transparency and that measurability to make those informed decisions. And then, and I always say, data doesn't have all the answers, but it can also keep you from making a very, very big mistake. And there's one organization, which I'm not going to name, but I did work with once, and I literally watched them make I call it the $1 million mistake, because they had the data in front of them, they ignored it, and they mobilized the entire organization to chase this vanity feature. And so I always use that as a story that I tell to avoid making these types of big mistakes just based on gut feel.
Right. They were missing the big picture, missing the data picture. I'm sure you're talking about Kodak, but
no, it wasn't Kodak.
We won't mention their name.
Or Blockbuster, right? Yeah.
Or Blockbuster, or Betamax. Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. All right. Let's wrap things up. The billboard question: what one-word piece of advice would you put on a billboard for business owners who are navigating today's economy to see as they drive by it on the highway of life? What would that one or two words piece of advice be? Jason?
I'm going to go with, I'm going with focus.
Focus. Chuoru?
To me, the big thing is always cash flow.
Cash flow. Spoken
Cash
like a
flow.
true CFO.
Yes, because that's what makes your scale. So everything has to have to involve cash flow. If you don't have cash flow, nothing's, it will be static. Your organization's not going to grow. You won't have any opportunity, resources to scale. So cash flow is the biggest thing, always.
To paraphrase the famous saying, cash flow is king.
Yes.
All right, Jason, how can our listeners connect with you?
Probably the best way is to reach out on LinkedIn. So you can reach me on linkedin.com/Jason Howard So, S-O. That's the best place to reach me on. And I'm always open to meeting and connecting with like-minded individuals.
All right, and Chuoru, how can people connect with you?
LinkedIn is the best place to find me. Also, and my firm also has a website. Feel free to check it out. I'm sure I'll give it the link. It's called elevatevcfo.com. So feel free to check out the website, connect me on LinkedIn, and happy to connect with anyone who has burning questions for their business or just like-minded individuals who wants to connect.
Great. And we'll link all that up in the show notes. All right, Jason, Chuoru, thank you so much for sharing your insights today on the never-ending, miserable topic of tariffs. I hope that everybody had some takeaways, both fractionals and businesses tuning in. I think there's some good value here today. And let's just hope that, right now we're recording this. It's middle of July. And as we know, anything can happen tomorrow with Mr. Taco running the show. So we'll see. Hopefully, who knows, maybe all this will be irrelevant by the time this comes out. But we'll see. We'll stay tuned. All right. Thank you so much again, Jason and Chuoru, for joining us today on the Fractional Pros Canada Pod.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Robert, for having us.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada Podcast. If you're a fractional professional based in Canada, we'd love to have you join us in the Fractional Pros Canada Facebook group, the home for Canada's fractional community. It's where Canadian fractional executives connect, share insights, and help each other succeed. Until next time, I'm Robert Mendelson, Fractional CMO. May your impact be full-time, even if your hours are fractional.